Good afternoon. And now, I'm pleased to welcome a very special guest. Mr. John Davis is the originator and producer of Motor Week, a weekly network television program now shown on over 300 stations. Today, John will conduct a live Civic versus Corolla walk-around comparison, and this presentation is being videotaped right now for use later as a sales training aid. Please welcome John Davis.
Hello, I am John Davis, host of the public television series Motor Week. For those of you that weren't here last year, let me take just a minute to bring you up to date on what we do on our series every week. Basically, we test cars. Over the last year, we've tested over 150 different new car and truck models. Now, we put those vehicles through the same kinds of dynamic testing that the major print magazines do, but we go beyond that. We spend an awful lot of time looking at cars the way we think the average consumer looks at them in the showroom. We look at the styling, how well the interior is laid out, how comfortable it is, how convenient the controls are, the fuel economy. In other words, everything that has to do with the car that they will encounter in day-to-day driving. Right now, value for the dollar is becoming increasingly important in car buying decisions. We spend a lot of time looking at that too. You have to remember that right now on the road in America, the average age of the average car is approaching 8 years. Now that is a post-World War II record. So buyers know that the car they're buying today, they may well be driving at the turn of the century. The 90s, it seems to us, is shaping up very much as the decade of the family car. Most of the new cars that we've tested in the last year or so and have on our schedule for 93 are 2- and 4-door family models. In the past, these models were often overshadowed by niche vehicles like sports cars or sport utilities. But family cars are back in vogue. And that's why this year, this 7th generation Toyota Corolla is so important and receiving so much attention. Corolla is a nameplate that's been among the world's best-selling cars since its inception in 1966. In the U.S. alone, over the last 25 years, they've sold 4 million Corollas. But the Corolla, for us, has never been a car that invoked the thought of excitement or thrill. And this new design, despite all of Toyota's ads, still doesn't exactly cause our heart to bubble. Nevertheless, the Corolla is a very important car. 200,000 Corollas were sold in the U.S. in the 1991 model year, and Toyota's goal for 1993 model year is over 250,000. How are they going to get that? Well, the 93 Corolla is new and much improved, and the public and the press alike like new and improved things. Indeed, the latest Corolla is a very impressive car when taken as a whole car, just like, I might add, the Honda Civic. But what happens when you look closer at this new Toyota design? Is it really that new and advanced, or is it still very conventional? I've found that every good car is more than the sum of its parts. It's only when you do a detailed analysis of a vehicle, take it apart piece by piece, feature by feature, that you understand where its real pluses and minuses lie. And that's what we're going to do today. Toyota plans to very much follow their successful marketing approach that they used last year on the Camry with this car, the new Corolla. Indeed, you'll pretty much hear me say that this is a smaller version of the Camry. But is that the right approach? Because this is not the same car, and it's not going after the same market. In fact, making this car very much like a shrunken Camry was not well received in Japan, where this car has been on sale for almost a whole year and has garnered about half the volume that Toyota expected for it. It's been a big disappointment. For today's comparison, we're going to be comparing this mid-level Toyota Corolla DX automatic to a mid-level Honda Civic LX with an automatic. At first glance, to you and probably to the consumer, they look very comparable. Normally, I would leave all price comparisons to the end, but the Civic versus Corolla value comparison is so compelling that I'm going to start off with that today. Now, I've heard Toyota salespeople say that Corolla buyers have a perception that this car is a better value than the Civic. Well, what are the facts? The 93 Civic LX with an automatic transmission has a sticker price of $12,635. This Corolla DX automatic is priced $463 higher at $13,098. Okay, it's higher, but not by much, right? But the question is, what do you get for that price? Or more importantly, what don't you get on this car that is standard on the LX for less money? How about this? No power windows, no power door locks, no cruise control, no tilt steering wheel. The Civic has a tachometer. The Corolla DX Automatic does not. Now, these are major convenience features that customers expect, and some of them, like the power windows and the tachometer, are not even available on the Corolla DX Automatic. If you could buy these features as a package, you'd probably pay $1,500 or more for them. That brings the value advantage of the Civic LX versus the Corolla DX in round numbers to $2,000. Now, I know that perception is reality, but these are facts that no one, especially no customer, can ignore. Power windows, locks, cruise control, tilt wheel, major value-added items. They're not on this DX model, and the advantages of this car over the LX are not enough to outweigh that $2,000 disadvantage. Yes, this car has a bigger engine. Yes, this car has split folding rear seats. Yes, this car has one size bigger tires, but that's not enough. In fact, if a buyer really wanted a Corolla comparable to the Civic LX, they'd have to move up from the DX Corolla to the Corolla LE. That has a base price of $15,218. That's $2,600 more than the Civic LX. You don't have to be a mathematician to see that in any value comparison, the Civic still wins out. Safety is another one of those major 90s concerns of almost every buyer. These two cars also compare very favorably on safety equipment. Both have the #1 consumer want these days, a driver's side airbag. It's the #1 question we get when anyone wants to know about a car. They want to know, does it have an airbag? However, it is worth reminding customers that the Corolla, which has a driver's side airbag this year, did not have one last year. The Civic has had an airbag. This is its second year. It's not new to the Civic. Both cars have 5-mile-an-hour bumpers. Both cars have rear shoulder belts, child-proof door locks, anti-lock brakes, another big topic of conversation these days. The Corolla DX can be ordered with ABS for an $825 extra fee. Unfortunately, the Civic LX cannot be ordered with ABS. However, remind you that anti-lock brakes are standard on the Civic EX. ABS is optional on all Corollas, even their top-of-the-line LE model. Another safety item that we don't often think about when we talk about safety is visibility. Notice the low cowl on the Civic and lots of glass, something that Honda owners expect. Good visibility is a big safety plus. This was driven home to me only last week. My wife and I were out in a driving rainstorm in heavy traffic, something that normally makes you feel very nervous, and we noticed, amazingly, how much more calmer we were than we usually are in cars that are a bit more confining because we could see so much better. So good glass, big visibility plus for the Civic over the Corolla, something that you should always point out to anyone interested in these two cars. So as we look closer at these two models, you'll see a lot of other areas where the Corolla just barely measures up to the Civic, some where it's a little better, but a lot of areas where it doesn't come close to the Civic. Starting off with styling. People still like cars because of what they look like. Now, the Corolla's styling this year has made a big step forward. They got away from the creased look of last year. The car looks very substantial on the road. It's very much in the form of the Camry with lots of rounded corners. Now, a lot of these corners also look a little featureless. One automotive writer looked at this car and dubbed it the lava look. I have a problem with the styling as we get towards the rear. I think there's some inconsistencies. Very rounded in the front, still a little boxy in the rear so they can maintain their trunk, and it bothers me. It doesn't look like the car was done by the same designers. Comparing that to the Civic, the low cowl, this tapered C-pillar back here, the high trunk, this car is a car that cannot be mistaken for any other car on the road. The Corolla is an example of what you do, what happens when you just put aerodynamics on a small car chassis. It often looks featureless. You've got to work to make aerodynamics work with a small vehicle. By now, most car designers know that pushing the wheels as far apart as possible is the way to go. The longer wheelbase that you get from that gives you a better ride. It also reduces the worthless front overhang and makes things like seams between the body and the bumpers seem less noticeable. Over here on the Corolla, of course, they haven't done that. They didn't do it with the Camry, and they didn't do it here. Lots of front overhang. The seams are very wide. This extra visual indentation here. Looks like a seam, makes the whole fit and finish of the front end look a little questionable. It's not something that's being done on more and more modern designs. It's sorry to see it done here. Furthering that point, let's compare the wheelbases to overall length on these two cars. It's one measure of overall design efficiency. The Corolla, as far as length, is an inch shorter than the Civic, even though it looks like a bigger car, 172 inches versus 173 for the Civic. But even though the Corolla is billed as an all-new car, its chassis is actually partially carried over from last year. The wheelbase has grown 1.3 inches, but it's still only 97 inches. Now that compares to 103.2 inches on the Civics, 6.2 inches difference. That's a lot of difference. And I'm sure you remember that the Civic wheelbase is actually longer than the Camry. When you divide wheelbase and use length, you find that the Civic uses 60% of its overall length for its wheelbase. That's a very high number. The Corolla, 56%, a very conventional number. Nothing new here. Being Camry-like, it's not surprising that the Corolla also fails to correct some of the exterior foibles and actually adds a couple of new ones that detract from the overall look of the car. We mentioned the long overhang that gives us big seams for fit and finish problems. Body side moldings are rather narrow. They're not very thick. They don't protrude very far from the sheet metal of the car, so they really won't protect the body very well from parking lot dings. One item they did correct from the Camry, the mirrors now do fold away. By the way, the clone for this car, the Geo Prism, still has fixed mirrors. Something I don't like that's particular to Corollas and actually was carried over from last year's car is this rather cheap-looking outside housing for the antenna. It's just too visible. Here's something that I think is rather inexpensive looking. The wipers. They're very high up on the windshield and they're almost totally exposed. Not something I'd expect in this design. And here's one I noticed a few minutes ago. There's a seam in the trim that goes around the top of the windows. It has a gap in it. It looks very unfinished. Again, not something I expect to find on a car of any price these days. When we take a look at the Civic, of course, the outside mirrors continue to fold away. It's become a Honda trademark. The body side moldings are very thick. They protrude from the body quite far. They do what they're designed to do. The wipers are partially hidden by the hood. They sit low on the windshield. Looks more expensive. You just don't notice them when you walk up to the car. And the trim around the doors, there is a seam, but it's way down here and it's very well finished. It looks expensive. Let's take a look at the interior of the Corolla. It's a reasonably inviting place, but again, since it follows the seam of the Camry, it has a lot in common with it. A high dash. It's hard to see over. Dark colors. The seat fabrics, frankly, they look more like aftermarket seat covers, not something I'm particularly fond of. They have some nice flowing lines in here, but they've got a quandary. How do you make this a sturdy, child-proof family car and still have that luxury feeling bringing it down from the Camry? It's a very tough road to hoe, and I don't think they've successfully executed it. There are a lot of good points to talk about on the interior of this car. They have very clear gauges, although there aren't enough of them on the DX. Remember, there's no tachometer, so it kind of gives the dashboard a rather rental car look. The seats are very comfortable. If you order cruise control, the switches are near the steering wheel, but they're not right on the steering wheel like they are in the Civic. The seats have good back support. The shifter, automatic and manual, works quite well. There's a big glove box and, of course, the standard driver's side airbag. But remember, compared to the Civic LX, there's no tilt steering wheel standard. Also, one other thing that I noticed that I like particularly about the Honda Civic that is not present in the Corolla, when it gets to setting the ventilation controls, you want controls that you can set mindlessly, that have the least amount of action. The push buttons that are current on all Civics is a far cry easier system to use than the slider controls where you have to look to see where they're set that the Corolla uses. Something else that the Civic has that I like a lot is the dash top ventilation vent that easily puts air into the back seat. It's a feature that not only does the Corolla not have, but virtually no other car on the market has it too. Other points I think that are very strong looking at the interior of this Civic LX, the choice of fabrics look both sturdier and more luxurious, look more expensive. The door trim particularly is very upmarket for this car. And of course, there's a standard driver's side airbag. The cruise controls are right on the steering wheel, tilt steering wheel standard, tachometer, all the things we mentioned before. A much nicer looking environment to drive in every day. Interior measurements are something that everyone talks about, and let's get down to that because they are important. For comfort-wise, both cars have height-adjustable seat belts. The Corolla advertises that it is bigger on the inside. Of course, it doesn't say bigger than what. It actually has less front legroom, less front seat headroom than the Civic. With all its interior increase, it has less front head and legroom. It only betters the Civic in front shoulder room, and that by less than ½ an inch, not very much. The Civic continues to have a slight advantage in rear headroom measurements as well. And indeed, it is in the rear the only real advantage that the Corolla has in measurements given its new compact size classification. It does have 0.8 of an inch more rear legroom than the Civic. However, that's mostly due to the fact that you can push your feet further up under the seats in the Corolla than you can the Civic. Also, they've sculpted out the backs of the seats for more knee room, but in the process, they took out something. There are no map pockets in the back seats of the Corolla, where there is a map pocket in the back of the passenger seat on the Civic. The Toyota, in my opinion, does score well in the fact that its rear folding seat is split. It's in two pieces. The Civic has a single piece folding seat. But what about the use of that feature? That's something else again. Both cars have the ability to lock the rear folding seat. If you lock the seat on a Corolla, however, and wish to unlock it, you must open the trunk, crawl in, and flip a switch. If, on the other hand, you fold the seat on the Civic and fold it back up and wish to lock it so no one can get into the trunk from inside, you do that with a key. You just open the door, crawl in, and turn the key. Very civilized. You don't have to crawl in the trunk like you do on the Corolla. What about the trunks themselves? Let's open them up and take a quick look. The biggest thing that you notice on the inside of the Corolla trunk is how nicely it is finished off. It is finished off actually better than the Camry. And they've done a nice job. But what about usefulness of the trunk? Well, what I notice is I look at the lower lip, the lip that you have to lift luggage up over. And on the Corolla, it is 7 inches narrower than it is on the Civic. Now that means if you have a heavy 3-seater suitcase like I carry around, on the Civic I can lift it up and slide it right in, no problem. On the Corolla I have to lift it up, turn it 90 degrees, then slide it in. That's inconvenient. Both cars have about the same height off the ground that you have to lift over. The Civic, on the other hand, has a longer floor, and when you fold that seat down, you have more area to slide things into the interior passenger compartment. Also, the valet feature is important. A lot of people like to make sure that the trunks cannot be opened when they're not with the car. On the Civic, in order to make sure that the trunk cannot be opened with a remote trunk release, again, all you need is the key. It's right down by the driver's seat. On the Corolla, to activate the valet function to make sure that the remote trunk release will not work, you have to get out of the car, go around back, stick the key, and turn it. Less convenience. Let's take a look at the other end of the car, what we usually call the business end of cars. The Corolla, in this version, in the DX, is powered by their up-level engine. It's a 1.8-liter engine. It has 2 overhead cams, 16 valves per engine, 4 valves per cylinder. It's a very energetic engine. It puts out 115 horsepower in 49 state trim, 110 in California, 115 pound-feet of torque. The engine packaging is fine. It's pretty neat. You can get to most everything. All the way around, it's a good job. However, I should note that this particular powertrain uses an iron block still. Toyota lags Honda significantly when it comes to use of all aluminum powertrains like you have in this car. 1.5 liters. It is smaller. Only 1 cam in the Civic, overhead cam, versus 2 overhead cams in the Corolla. In my opinion, that just means one less thing to go wrong over the life of the car. The important fact is you have 16 valves, 4-valve per cylinder technology, best breathing and economy for performance combination you can get. So what that it just takes a little less hardware to drive it. Now you probably think that with all this extra horsepower here, that this car might have a significant performance advantage. Well, what are the facts? Everybody's tested this car, including us so far. With a manual transmission, Corolla with this powertrain, 0 to 60, the stoplight dash that everybody wants to talk about, 8.8 to 9.3 seconds. Our own test was 9 seconds flat. The best time we got with this car with a manual transmission, 9.6 seconds. Blink your eyes once, that's the difference. Not a lot to talk about. But there is something else to talk about, and that is fuel economy. Bigger engines, more horsepower, normally mean poorer fuel economy. A Corolla DX with a manual transmission is EPA rated at 28 city and 34 highway. The Civic LX manual at 34 city, that's 6 miles per gallon more, and 40 highway, also a 6 mile per gallon advantage. Now when gas prices go up, which car do you want to be driving? I don't think there's any question what the answer is. Put an automatic in and the fuel economy advantage for the Honda continues. Specifically, the Toyota is rated at 26 city, 33 highway. This Honda, 30 and 38. 30 city, 38 highway. No surprise that even though the Corolla has a larger fuel tank, 13.2 gallons, it's 1.3 gallons larger than the Civic, that the Civic, under optimum conditions, still has a longer cruising range, 476 miles versus 448. Remember also a larger fuel tank means more weight you have to carry around. The suspension. If there's one area that shows the difference in the technologies used between these two cars, it is in the suspension system. Once again, Toyota has stuck to their tried and true and not very expensive to manufacture McPherson strut suspension system. What makes this car a little better handler than it was before is not what they've done with the suspension, but more it's the fact it has more tire. The standard tire has grown from 13 to 14 inches. Toyota has done their homework, though, on quiet ride. They included putting things like foam in some of the body cavities. This is the same thing they did on the Camry, and it does block some of the sound from the interior. But I was reminded by our automotive technician on our staff that when General Motors tried that some years back, what they got for their trouble was rust from the inside out, because eventually the foam would collect moisture. Also, an engineer at one of the Detroit manufacturers told me that when they tore down a Camry to look at how they made the car so quiet, they found this foam basically did not fill the cavities. It was on the wall of the cavities, and they weren't quite sure why it works or how it works. And to this day, they don't see the advantage. So it's there. They say it works. It is a quiet car, but I'm not sure that some of the things they do to make it quiet are as vital as they pretend. The Civic, of course, it's double wishbone suspension at both ends. It has a long wheelbase that delivers a very smooth ride, the kind of high-tech controlled ride you're used to having in a Civic. The quiet ride on the Corolla has its down points. Because the car has a relatively short wheelbase, they've kept the spring rates rather high to keep the car from pitching over bumps. So it's quiet, but it's not as smooth a ride as the Civic. Summing up the way these two cars are to drive, I'd say that the Corolla is a fine, small highway cruiser. The Civic, to me, is a fine, small, long-distance car that's on home on every type of road. Everywhere I drive a Civic, I feel comfortable in it. Both cars use similar setups in their braking systems. We have ventilated front disc on both cars. We have drums in the rears. However, you can get an ABS system on the Corolla DX, but only with rear drum brakes. As I mentioned, you can't get ABS on the Civic LX, but it is standard on the Civic EX, and on the EX you not only get disc brakes in the rear with the ABS system, which are preferred for performance driving, you also get a fully electronic Honda-designed ABS system. Also remember that ABS, although it is available on all Corollas, it is an option on all models, $825 even on their top-level LE. So, we're now to the point where we're summing up both cars. The Corolla is certainly one of the finest conventional small cars that's ever been put out. They get a lot of refinement and interior usage out of a basic design. But buyers of the Honda Civic are getting more than that. They're getting the best technology that, in my opinion, has ever been put into a small car. Maybe that's part of the reason that driving a Corolla is something of a numbing experience. Maybe that's also part of the reason that the Corolla is the #1 preferred small car among retired buyers, where the Civic seems to appeal to buyers that are young at heart in all age groups. To say that this Corolla is something of a big advance in small car design, I don't believe is correct. I've taken a look at all of their advertisements where they're asking the buying public these questions, and I've asked it of myself. They're saying, what do you call a car that has increased leg room, more rear seat space, expanded interior width, more room for your belongings? What do you call a new small car with an improved suspension system, a more powerful fuel-injected engine, and safety features such as driver's side airbag, door impact beams, available anti-lock brakes? Well, from where I sit, the answer I would give is not Toyota Corolla, it's Honda Civic, and it's the only answer to those questions for the last 12 months. Finally, I asked myself one more question. If I were going to have to drive one of these two cars for the next 8 years, until the year 2001, which one do I think would seem least dated? Well, my answer, despite this formidable new competition from Toyota, is the 1993 Honda Civic. It's a car that I think is the most technologically advanced small car in the world today, and I think it will remain so for years to come. Thank you very much. Now we turn our attention from the Toyota Corolla to the current media darling, Saturn. While Andy Warhol felt that everyone deserved their 15 minutes of fame, it's become fact that a new car has about 9 to 18 months of fame before it's eclipsed by a newer, more advanced model. Now, Saturn is certainly currently enjoying that fame and will do so for most of the next year. The Saturn Day in the Sun, however, is quite different. It's not just another new model. Saturn is a total experience and a complete departure from the way that General Motors has designed and sold cars in the past. They have few dealers spread over a wide area, and they couple that with a well-designed, if mostly conventional car. And don't forget the Buy American fervor. And this is all allowing Saturn to lure buyers into the showroom and convince them with a genteel one-price take-it-or-leave-it approach. Saturn is keying in on how much customers hate to haggle on new car prices. And they're being very upfront about the fact that their markup of about 12% is less than their competitors at 17 to 18%. So Saturn and their associates are telling their customers when they come in that they're getting the best price without a hassle. Tie that in with good response from Saturn management and early quality control problems, polls that show the car very favorably from people like J.D. Powers and others, and a lot of good publicity not only from car enthusiast magazines, but also non-automotive magazines like Time and Business Week. One more thing to factor in, all this great word of mouth, and what you have here is a phenomenon that is Saturn. Now, for anyone to argue against this phenomenon while Saturn is on a roll is frankly rather fruitless. I would recommend that Honda dealers actually brush up on their own sales techniques. After all, remember that Honda dealers have been approaching buyers as intelligent consumers since the very beginning. Then you have to get down to the nitty-gritty and take a look at the product itself. As good as this car is, it's clearly not a Honda. Now, in my comparison against this Honda Civic LX over here, we're going to be using a Saturn SL2 sedan. Now, while this is the top-level sedan four-door for Saturn right now, its equipment level and price actually more closely match the Civic LX. Actually, Saturn had planned a premium-level SL3 sedan for '93, but it was dropped. Despite a 6.5% price rise for 1993, $925 on this car, the Saturn SL2 with automatic transmission is still priced reasonably at $12,245. That's $390 less than the Civic LX at $12,635. One obvious thing you do get on this car you don't get on the Civic are the cast wheels. But once again, these base prices don't really tell the story. There's an awful lot of equipment that you don't get on this car for that price. For instance, on the Saturn SL2, there are no standard power windows, no standard power door locks, and no cruise control. To bring this Saturn SL2 up to the level of a Honda Civic LX, you have to spend another $1,655 for a package that does include air conditioning. So where are we? Okay, the Saturn price then, $13,900, or about the same as the price for a Civic LX with dealer-installed air conditioning. So when it comes to real on-the-road prices, these cars are quite comparable. And we all know, of course, that Honda dealers right now are a lot more apt to deal on a car than our Saturn dealers. Styling, an important factor on any car, very important factor on Saturn, because it's the one area of the design where Saturn really could not escape the GM corporate think. The front end is quite attractive enough, but it's not that much different from some other GM cars like the Geo Storm. Also, you see some Pontiac, some Buick, and Oldsmobile here. Right now, Saturn has been able to improve the distinctiveness on the SL2. The 93 models have a different lower chin spoiler that looks more aggressive, but overall it still has a lot of GM styling in the front. Also, the styling of the side, the profile of the Saturn, in my opinion, is not very clean. The lower body cladding looks tacked on, it looks heavy. But it's around the back that you see the real confused heritage of the styling on the Saturn. There's no mistaking this rear glass. It looks like it comes right off an Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. And it's not the kind of styling cue that you want to put on a car that's going to be aimed at import car buyers. Even Saturn officials concede that styling is not their strong suit, nor are such inexpensive looking touches as this, the wipers that sit well up on the windshield, or rear view mirrors that basically are fixed. By the way, something unusual about these mirrors, you basically get both mirrors, left and right, on a Saturn SL2, but this mirror on the driver's side is manually controlled, while the mirror on the passenger side has a power control. On a Civic LX, both mirrors are remote power controlled. Now, it's also true that the body on the Saturn is ding resistant. It's mostly plastic. Now, I've actually hit the door of a Saturn with a bowling ball and had no visible results. But even though this material does give, it is not impervious to scratches when hit with the sharp edge of a door in a parking lot. Saturn went with plastic for a couple of reasons. One was weight. However, this car still weighs 56 pounds more than a Civic, and that's before you add all the optional equipment to bring it up to the level of a Honda Civic LX. The other was rust and corrosion resistance. Well, as you probably realize, the Civic uses extensive amounts of rust-corrosive proof galvanized steel to keep basically rust a problem that just doesn't exist. Also, you'll notice that on the Civic there are very extensive use of body side molding. It really protects from dings. You don't even have body side molding on the side of the Saturn. So basically the advantages of the plastic body in this car really don't matter to very much. Exterior dimensions. The Saturn is 3.3 inches longer than a Civic. A lot of that is very obvious here. You have a lot more front overhang than you do in a Civic. The wheelbase is very similar, 102.4 inches. That's only 0.8 of an inch shorter than the Civic. But still, the efficiency ratio, the ratio of wheelbase to overall length, is lower on the Saturn, only 58% compared to the 60% on the Civic. I will say that this Saturn does a very good job, better than the Corolla, of using glass. There's a lot of glass. It gives the exterior a very sporty look, makes the interior very airy, and there is good visibility inside. Open the door to the inside, however, and you're confronted with what is, I think, a rather big negative on the Saturn. Despite a driver's side airbag, which is standard for 93, optional in 92, Saturn did not redesign the door structure, so the dreaded automatic mouse and a track door belt remains. I've lost count at how many times that I've been caught in the neck with one of these belts retracting when I've opened the door to either look for a remotely lever on the floor or look for something I've dropped. Also, there have been surveys done that show that cars with automatic seat belts, that most of those owners do not use the manual lap belt. In an accident without that manual lap belt, it's possible to be out of proper position when the airbag deploys. It's a real negative. The Civic's integral lap and shoulder belts obviously solve this problem. The instrument panel on the Saturn is well laid out. The quality of the plastics is right good. However, the gauges, which are quite clear, are still kind of on the small side. There's no in-dash cup holder. Basically, though, the dash is well laid out. Most of the switches work extremely tactfully, so they feel like they have a very good feel. Right now, the biggest thing that I have a problem with the Saturn dash is something that's been a problem with this dash since the first car I saw, and that is this seam across the top. It's quite wide. It runs from one side of the dash to the other. What this is, there's a cover on the top of the dash that is taken off to install components during assembly. But this cover looks like it doesn't fit very flush. As a matter of fact, it doesn't around the edges. And even when the seam is perfectly right, uniform from one side to the other, it looks unfinished. It makes the fit and finish of the interior, brings it down a notch from a lot of its competition. It's something you certainly don't see in the Civic, and you really don't see in any other import car that I'm aware of. While Saturn does have a bit more interior volume than the Civic, in critical dimensions, it falls short. Front seat headroom, very important to anybody my height, 6/10 of an inch less in the Saturn than in the Civic. I will say the seats are quite comfortable, they have good back support, but you miss the headroom. Also, leg room, while it is the same in both cars, the rest position for your left foot is less comfortable in the Saturn, an important factor for long trips. And the back, the headroom situation is even worse. Here, Saturn has 9/10 of an inch less headroom than the Civic. Because of this, Saturn has made the seats amazingly upright, and they also seem to have skimped on the cushioning. The back seats are right hard, very thinly padded. Makes the back seat of the Saturn really more at home for a growing family than for a group of adult commuters. The split folding seats in the back are a plus, but there is no way to lock those split folding seats. So if someone breaks into the car, they can get into the trunk through that area. They can also get into the trunk by pulling the remote trunk lever, since there is no valet lockout on the Saturn as there is on the Civic. Speaking of the trunk design is very comparable to the Civic. It has about a half a cubic foot less space. But basically, the lip is about the same height as the Civic. The width of the lip is similar, so you can get heavy bags in relatively easily. The one thing you notice is that the interior of the trunk is finished off with a quality of material that's not very high grade. It looks like a lot of other General Motors products. Let's now move to the front of the car and take a look at the engine. Saturn has one block. It is all aluminum, block and head, like Civic. It is 1.9 liters. They make it in two versions. The SL2 comes standard with a twin cam version. It has 16 valves. It's a very powerful engine, 124 horsepower and 122 pound-feet of torque. Now that's 21% more horsepower and 24% more torque than the Civic. That's a substantial number. But remember, this car is heavier. Not only the 56 pounds we talked about, but now you have to add weight for all the extra options that are options on this car that simply bring it up to the level of the Honda Civic LX. So therefore, acceleration times, stoplight acceleration times, which most people are concerned about, there's not a big difference between the two cars. Manual transmission SL2, 8.9 seconds. Those are our numbers. 9.6 seconds for the Civic. Now, what this engine is very good at producing besides horsepower is noise. This car has had a problem with noise and vibration since the very beginning. Notice the extra sound deadening material underneath the hood of this car. Right now, Saturn is doing some things to lessen the noise and vibration problem, but even on the most recent 93 model that we drove, we still found the engine quite thrashy. A word about transmissions. The transmissions on this car include a 5-speed manual and a 4-speed automatic. 5-speed manual is the only 5-speed made by one of the Detroit Big Three automakers that comes close to smoothness compared to a Honda. It's a very good transmission. It used Honda as a base for it, and you can see in the shifting action that they've tried to get close to the Honda degree of precision and smoothness. Their automatic also shifts very smoothly. It has a driver-selected dual shift mode, which frankly we find a very useless feature, something that a computer can control much better than a person. On automatic SL cars this year, you can get traction control. That's a new item for Saturn. But remember, traction control, which reduces slip when you're taking off on slippery conditions, is most useful on a rear drive car where there's not a lot of weight over the drive wheels. On a front wheel drive car like both of these, most of the weight is over the front wheels, so except in very extreme conditions, traction control is not a great benefit. Like the Corolla, the Saturn is no match, however, to the Civic in fuel economy. The Saturn SL2 Automatic is EPA rated at only 23 city and 32 highway. The Civic LX Automatic rates at 30 city and 38 highway. Now that's a 7 mile per gallon advantage for the Civic in city traffic and 6 on the highway. That means that under optimum conditions, it will take 50 gallons of gas more, 4 tankfuls, for this car to go 12,000 miles over the Civic. 50 gallons of gas more for the Saturn versus the Civic LX Automatic. I said that Saturn was mostly a conventional car. Nowhere is that more evident than in the suspension system. It is a very simplistic McPherson strut suspension system all the way around. As for driving characteristics, Saturn engineers have done a fine job at fine-tuning the chassis to develop a car that rides and handles quite well. By the way, 15-inch tires standard on the SL2, they help a lot. In a lot of ways, this car is over-tired. But Saturn still falls a little short of the Corolla when it comes to quiet ride, and it also doesn't quite match up to the Civic when it comes to quick steering response in corners. Saturn brakes, again, are similar to Civic with disc in the front, drums in the rear, but you can order on the Saturn an all-disc anti-lock braking system for $595, something that's not available on the Civic LX. But on the Civic EX, you have an all-electronic ABS system that is standard. The system that's available on the Saturn is a semi-electronic mechanical system. It's the Delco-engineered ABS system. It's a very good system. However, it doesn't respond quite as rapidly as the all-electronic system in the Civic. So there you have the Saturn. It's a fine, high-quality car that was designed with 1988 vintage Honda products as their benchmark. That's very important to remember. The only problem with using Honda cars as a benchmark is that the Honda target is constantly moving. The Civic has clearly moved beyond the Saturn in style and features and overall efficiency. However, the Saturn has captured the imagination of the intelligent customer, very much the way that Honda did in 1975 with its first Civic CVCC car. So to sell against Saturn, Honda dealers have to remember their roots. It worked for them once, it's working for the competition now, and it will work again. All of this will allow Honda dealers to keep the Honda Civic, the most advanced small car on the road today, in everybody else's headlights. Thank you.